poised and self-assured woman stepped into the exclusive world of first-class air travel, carrying herself with quiet authority and undeniable success. Yet the cabin crew, clouded by outdated assumptions and bias, regarded her as someone who didn't belong. Their subtle dismissals escalated, culminating in a humiliating exchange. What they didn't know was that this woman wasn't just another passenger, she was the owner of the airline. What follows is a powerful story of justice, strength, and the courage to challenge discrimination in the most unexpected setting, 40,000 feet above the ground. When prejudice collides with empowerment, lives are changed forever. This is a tale of breaking barriers, redefining respect, and rising above ignorance to send a message the world needs to hear. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love stories of resilience, empowerment, and justice, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us continue spreading impactful messages. Now, let's dive in. The cabin of Horizon Airways Flight 762 hummed with the steady rhythm of its powerful jet engines as it soared across the Atlantic. In first class, everything exuded luxury. The supple leather seats, the soft glow of ambient lighting, the neatly arranged blankets. Yet, beneath the surface elegance, an undercurrent of tension wove through the quiet hum of conversation. Naomi Carter leaned back into her seat, adjusting the cuffs of her tailored ivory blazer. Her sleek black hair was gathered into a low bun, a reflection of her composed and meticulous nature. She reached down, sliding her slim leather bag beneath the seat, her fingertips brushing the smooth surface. This wasn't just another trip. It was a strategic decision, a carefully planned move in a larger game she had been orchestrating for months. Today wasn't just about flying, it was about observing, testing, and, if necessary, intervening. As she settled in, a shadow loomed over her shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am," came a crisp, formal voice. Naomi turned her head to see a flight attendant standing beside her, an artificial smile plastered across her face. "Are you certain you're in the right seat?" the woman asked, her tone polite but tinged with unmistakable doubt. Naomi met her gaze, unwavering. "Yes, I am," she responded, her voice smooth and steady. The attendant hesitated for a brief moment before extending her hand. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Without breaking eye contact, Naomi slipped a hand into her blazer pocket and retrieved the pass, handing it over. The attendant studied the ticket carefully. Though her professional smile remained intact, her lips tightened slightly, and the barely perceptible pause in her movements spoke volumes. The unspoken doubt clung to the air between them. "Thank you," the woman finally said, returning the pass. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Her words were polite, but the subtle sharpness in her tone betrayed her skepticism. Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heel and walked away. Naomi allowed a faint, knowing smile to touch her lips. She had encountered this kind of scrutiny before. It was nothing new. Across the aisle, an older man in his 60s sat watching her. His silver hair was perfectly combed back, and he wore a sharply tailored navy suit. His piercing blue eyes swept over Naomi with a level of scrutiny she had long since stopped caring about. The faint scent of expensive cologne clung to the air around him, his gold watch catching the overhead lights as he adjusted it with a deliberate flick. "First class just isn't what it used to be," he muttered, loud enough for Naomi, and likely the rest of the cabin, to hear. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who had spent decades moving through the world unchecked, unchallenged. A few soft chuckles rippled through space, quiet but deliberate. Naomi ignored him. Instead, she reached for the safety card in the seat pocket in front of her, brushing her fingertips along its edges, not out of necessity, but out of habit. She knew these procedures better than most, because Naomi Carter wasn't just a first-class passenger. She was the CEO of Astra Air, the airline that was on the verge of acquiring Horizon Airways. This flight wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about understanding the culture of the company she was about to take over, seeing it from the inside. But just as she began to settle in, something beneath her feet caught her attention. A faint vibration. It was subtle, barely there, but Naomi's instincts flared. Years of experience told her this wasn't normal. She pressed her fingers lightly against the armrest, feeling the gentle but distinct rhythm of the plane's movement. Something was wrong. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice was calm, steady, too steady. "We're experiencing minor technical difficulties with one of our engines. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Murmurs spread through the cabin. Naomi could hear the tension in the voices around her. She exhaled slowly, her sharp gaze shifting to the window, studying the faint tremor along the engine casing outside. She recognized the pattern immediately, a potential imbalance in the engine turbines. Across the aisle, the silver-haired man who had sneered at her earlier had gone pale, his hand gripping the armrest tightly. "Technical difficulties," he muttered, his voice suddenly lacking the smug confidence it carried earlier. What the hell does that even mean? Naomi's mind worked fast, assessing the possibilities. Time was critical. She knew the risks, she knew what needed to be done, and she knew that in just a few moments she was going to have to make a choice. A choice that would not only reveal who she really was, but would determine the fate of everyone on board. The captain's announcement hung in the air like a brewing storm. Murmurs spread like ripples in water. What kind of technical difficulties? Do they think this is normal? This is ridiculous. I didn't pay for this. Naomi Carter tuned out the rising anxiety around her, her focus razor sharp. She turned toward the window, her dark eyes narrowing. The faint but unmistakable vibration along the engine casing outside sent a wave of recognition through her. A turbine imbalance. Across the aisle, the once smug silver-haired man had gone pale, gripping the armrest with white-knuckled intensity. Technical difficulties? He muttered under his breath. His earlier arrogance vanished. What the hell does that even mean? Before anyone could speculate further, the plane shuddered violently. A few gasps filled the cabin. A woman clutched the arm of her husband. A child whimpered somewhere in the back. The flight attendant returned, her professional demeanor still intact, but Naomi noticed the telltale signs of unease, her shoulders stiff, her movements just a bit too rigid. She was trained to appear calm, but her eyes betrayed her. Naomi's mind worked quickly, running through possibilities. Her father, Samuel Carter, had drilled into her since childhood. Flying isn't just about the aircraft, it's about the people who trust you to bring them home safe. The words echoed in her mind, reminding her of the legacy she carried. Then the intercom crackled again. "We apologize for the inconvenience," the captain's voice returned, though this time a thread of uncertainty slipped through his calm exterior. "Our crew is working to resolve the issue. Please remain calm." Naomi glanced at her watch. Time was slipping away. She weighed her options. She could stay seated, let the crew handle it, and hope for the best. Or a sharp, ominous chime sounded from the cockpit. Naomi's decision was made. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Immediately, the flight attendant stepped into her path, her professionalism now strained with visible concern. "Ma'am, I need you to remain seated," she said, her voice firm, though there was an unmistakable tremor beneath it. Naomi met her gaze without hesitation. "I understand," she replied, her tone calm but unwavering. "But I need to speak with the captain. Now." The flight attendant hesitated, glancing toward the other passengers. "I'm sorry, but passengers aren't allowed in the cockpit." Naomi took a slow step forward. "This isn't a request," she said, her voice edged with quiet authority. "Take me to the captain, or you'll regret the time you wasted arguing with me." The woman blinked, caught off guard by Naomi's controlled intensity. A long, tense pause. Then, finally, the flight attendant nodded. Gesturing for Naomi to follow, she led the way down the aisle. As Naomi walked, the whispers around her grew louder. The silver-haired man's eyes tracked her movements, his expression shifting from skepticism to something closer to curiosity, and perhaps the faintest trace of respect. The cabin held its breath as Naomi disappeared into the cockpit. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with urgency. The captain and first officer were locked in rapid conversation, their voices overlapping as they assessed the problem. The cockpit lights cast a sharp glow on their tense faces, illuminating the flashing warnings on the control panels. Naomi didn't wait for an invitation. "I know what's happening," she said, her voice cutting clean through the chaos. "And I know how to fix it." The captain turned sharply, his expression a mixture of skepticism and urgency. "And who exactly are you?" he demanded. Naomi straightened her shoulders. Naomi Carter, she said evenly, Chief Executive Officer of Astra Air, and I helped design the emergency protocols you're about to use. The captain's face flickered with recognition, but before he could respond, the controls issued another ominous warning. No more time for doubts. Naomi stepped forward, eyes locked on the instrument panel. Here's what you need to do. Far from the turbulence of the present, a quiet attic held the ghosts of Naomi's past. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim glow of a single flickering bulb. The scent of aged wood and time-worn paper hung thick in the air. Naomi Carter stood in the center of it all, the attic of her father's home feeling both familiar and foreign. It had been years since she had last stepped foot here. Since his funeral. Even now, the memories hit her with a quiet but forceful weight. The creak of the floorboards beneath her seemed deafening in the silence. Her eyes swept across the room until they landed on something familiar, hidden beneath a dust-covered canvas tarp. A shape from the past. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, then pulled the tarp away, revealing the worn leather surface of a trunk she hadn't seen since childhood. Her breath caught. The initials embossed on the lid, though faded, were unmistakable. S.C. Samuel Carter. Her hands trembled slightly as she unclasped the lid. The metallic click echoed softly, and as the trunk opened, the past spilled out into the present. Inside, a lifetime of history lay carefully preserved, items so intimately tied to her father's life that, for a moment, she felt like a little girl again, watching him prepare for yet another flight. A worn bomber jacket, its fabric bearing the patches of his old squadron. A weathered flight log, its pages smudged with ink and age. A pair of aviator sunglasses, one lens still showing a faint crack, a relic from a moment long ago. And beneath it all, tucked into a neat bundle at the very bottom, she saw them. Letters, dozens of them, bound together by fraying twine, their edges yellowed with time. Naomi hesitated, her fingers hovering over them, almost reverent. She hadn't known these letters existed. Carefully, she untied the twine and picked up the first one, unfolding it with delicate hands. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable, her father's voice preserved in every stroke. And as she began to read, a story long buried in time began to unfold. Naomi Carter traced her fingers over the cracked leather of the old bomber jacket, its fabric worn from years of use. The patches from her father's squadron still clung to it, faded but intact, a testament to a life spent soaring through the skies. Beneath it, she found his flight logs, their pages dog-eared and smudged with ink, chronicling thousands of hours in the air. And then, at the bottom of the trunk, she saw them. Letters. Bound together by fraying twine, their edges yellowed with time. Naomi hesitated. She hadn't known these existed. Her hands hovered over them, almost reverent, before she carefully untied the bundle and lifted the first sheet. The paper was fragile beneath her fingers, the ink slightly faded but still legible. And then she saw it. Her father's handwriting. A piece of him, preserved in ink. She took a deep breath and began to read. The first letter painted a vivid portrait of her father, not as the composed, unwavering pilot she had always known, but as a man filled with admiration, frustration, and an unshakable sense of duty. He wrote about David Long, his closest friend and comrade during the Vietnam War. A pilot whose quick thinking had saved their entire crew when a mission went horribly wrong. Without your precision, your instincts in that hellstorm, we never would have made it back to base. I owe you my life, and I'll spend the rest of it trying to repay you. Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the letter as she imagined the scene, the chaos of war, the deafening roar of gunfire, smoke and fire cutting through the sky, and at the center of it all, David. Calm, unshaken, steering them all to safety. Her father's gratitude bled through every word, but so did his anger, because despite everything David had done, the world refused to acknowledge his worth. You've proven that the color of a man's skin doesn't determine the strength of his character. You are the best damn pilot I have ever flown with, and it's a disgrace that anyone would think otherwise. Naomi's chest tightened. She could hear her father's voice in her mind, clear and certain, delivering each word with the quiet conviction he had carried through his life. But this letter wasn't just admiration. It was a promise. When this war ends, we have to do something. We have to fight for a sky where no one is held back by prejudice. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I promise you this. When we get back home, I'll be by your side. We'll build it together." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she set the letter down. The man she had idolized wasn't just a hero in the sky. He had fought battles on the ground too, battles against a world too blind to see the brilliance of his closest friend. She reached for the next letter. This one carried a sharper edge. "I spoke with a recruiter from one of the airlines today. Told him about you, about how you handled that emergency landing like it was nothing." He smiled, nodded, and then he said, "We're not ready for someone like him." I wanted to punch him in the face. Naomi pressed her lips into a thin line, feeling the weight of her father's frustration seep through the decades. His helplessness against an industry that refused to see past its own prejudice. And yet, even in his anger, he never lost sight of his purpose. "That's why we can't stop. I'm still with you, David. Always." She closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her bones. For the first time, she could feel her father's presence, not just as a memory, but as a force guiding her forward. He hadn't just believed in David. He had believed in a world that could be better. The last letter in the bundle was different. It was on official Horizon Airways letterhead, dated just months before her father's death. Naomi's breath caught as she read. "They don't want change, David. They want comfort. And for them, comfort means keeping people like you out. But I won't stop. I don't care if it takes my whole damn life. I won't let their small minds clip your wings." The words struck her like a blow. Her father had died before he could see his dream fulfilled, before he could break the system that had rejected David Leong. And now, decades later, Naomi could feel the weight of that unfinished promise resting squarely on her shoulders. She folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the trunk. Her hands lingered on the edges for a moment before she closed the lid. As the clasps clicked shut, it felt like she was sealing away more than just the past. She was sealing away a part of herself that could no longer stand idle. The attic was quiet as she rose to her feet, but inside her, a storm was building. Her father's fight wasn't over, and now, it was hers. She walked toward the attic door, her footsteps firm against the creaking wooden floor. The letters had been buried under decades of dust, but their message was clear. The skies her father had dreamed of still weren't a reality. But they would be. She would make sure of it. The city skyline blurred behind the rain-streaked window. Naomi Carter sat in her father's favorite leather armchair, her fingers tracing the creased edges of the letters on the small table beside her. A relic from a time when life felt simpler. Her mind drifted back to childhood, to long summer afternoons at the local airfield, to the hum of the engines, to the sharp scent of jet fuel clinging to the wind, to her father's voice. "You know, Naomi, the sky doesn't care who you are. It doesn't see race or rank. Up there, it's just you and your decisions." That's why I love it. She had been too young to understand the weight of those words then. But now, she understood. Because while the sky may have been impartial, the people controlling access to it were not. Her father had spent his entire life fighting against that reality. The stories he had told her weren't just about daring escapades in the sky. They had been lessons, warnings. The world of aviation, this golden age of flight, had been filled with promise. But only for some. Naomi reached for the photograph resting beside the letters, a grainy black-and-white image. Her father and David Leong standing shoulder to shoulder in front of their aircraft. They looked invincible, as if nothing could stop them. But something had. Not skill, not talent, not ability, prejudice. And now Naomi Carter had a choice. She could let the past remain buried in an attic, or she could do what her father never got the chance to finish. She could change the industry. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Naomi straightened in her chair, her jaw set, her path clear. She wasn't just here to acquire Horizon Airways. She was here to rewrite it. The letters Naomi Carter had unearthed in the attic now lay carefully unfolded on the small wooden table beside her. She studied them as if the ink might vanish if she looked away for too long. Outside the window, rain streaked down the glass, turning the city lights into a blurred mosaic of gold and silver. But Naomi wasn't seeing the skyline. Her mind was far away, drifting back to long summer afternoons at the airfield with her father. She could almost hear the steady hum of the engines, feel the warmth of the sun bouncing off the tarmac, and smell the sharp tang of jet fuel in the air. It had clung to her father's clothes, a scent she had grown to associate with adventure, with purpose, with flight. "You know, Naomi," her father, Samuel Carter, had said one afternoon, crouching beside her as she peered into the cockpit of a twin-prop plane. "The sky doesn't care who you are. It doesn't see race, or rank, or privilege. Up there, it's just you and your decisions. That's why I love it." At the time, she hadn't fully understood the weight of those words. Now, as she stared at the letters before her, their meaning had never been clearer. Because while the sky may not have cared, the people controlling access to it did. Samuel Carter had spent most of his life fighting that reality. The stories he told Naomi as a child were full of the daring escapades of aviation's so-called golden age, a time when the industry seemed unstoppable, glamorous, and full of boundless opportunity. Yet beneath that sheen of progress, there had always been cracks. Cracks that David Liang had fallen through. Naomi leaned forward, brushing her fingers over the letters as her thoughts returned to him. She had never met David, but her father had spoken of him often, describing him as the most brilliant pilot he had ever flown with. David's talent was evident in every word her father had written, but so was the pain of watching him be rejected, again and again. Naomi closed her eyes, picturing them. Two young men, sharp and fearless, navigating the chaos of war. She imagined David at the controls during that fateful mission her father had written about, his hands steady as the world around him burned. He had saved lives, defied death, earned the respect of every man in their unit. But when he returned home, his skill and accolades weren't enough to overcome the one barrier he couldn't control: prejudice. Her father's frustration burned through the ink on the page. "They're blind," he had written. "Blind to what he's done, blind to who he is. How do I make them see what's right in front of them?" The words haunted Naomi, because decades later, the world her father had fought to change still bore the scars of its failures. The golden age of aviation had never been golden for men like David Liang. Naomi reached for the photograph resting beside the letters. It was one of the few her father had kept from his time in the war. A grainy black-and-white image. A younger Samuel Carter, standing shoulder to shoulder with David Liang, both grinning despite the hardship etched into their faces. They looked invincible, as if nothing could stop them. She traced the edges of the photo, her mind drifting to the stories her father had shared, about David's attempts to enter commercial aviation. She remembered the night her father had come home from a meeting with a recruiter, a man who had listened to Samuel speak about David's skill, his precision, his brilliance, and then had smiled, nodded, and said, "We're not ready for someone like him." Her father had paced the kitchen, his fists clenched, his voice thick with frustration. "You don't understand, Naomi," he had said, his normally calm demeanor replaced by something raw and unshakable. "David isn't just a good pilot, he's the best pilot. But none of that matters to them. They see his face, and that's all it takes. It makes me sick." Naomi had never seen him so angry. At the time, she hadn't understood why it mattered so much to him. Now, sitting in his old chair, the weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. The industry he had loved, the skies he had fought to protect, had failed the people who deserved it most. And yet, he had never stopped trying to fix it. Her thoughts turned to the final years of his life, to the accident in 1993 that had taken him too soon. She remembered the phone call, the shock of hearing the news, the hollow ache of knowing he was gone. But as time passed, she had come to realize something even more painful. The greatest tragedy wasn't just his death. It was the unfinished work he had left behind. Naomi's eyes drifted back to the letters, the words now carved into her memory. "One day we'll have an airline that looks like the world we fought for." It didn't read like a dream. It read like a challenge, a call to action, a promise that had been waiting for decades to be fulfilled. She rose from the chair, her resolve solidifying with every step. Samuel Carter's vision of a better world had been stifled by forces larger than himself. But Naomi? She had the tools to do what he couldn't. She had built Astra Air from the ground up, proving that excellence wasn't limited by outdated prejudices. And now, with the Horizon Airways acquisition within reach, she had the power to finish what he started. She turned to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, blurring the lights of the city below. The storm outside didn't faze her, because inside, a new storm was brewing. One she intended to unleash, one that would change the skies forever. The city lights blurred in the distance, streaked by the rain cascading down the glass, a reflection of the challenges ahead. And yet, for the first time in years, Naomi Carter didn't feel daunted. The so-called golden age of aviation may have been flawed, but she was determined to forge a new era, one where the skies were truly open to everyone. The terminal at Logan International Airport buzzed with an endless stream of movement, a symphony of rolling suitcases, clipped footsteps, and the steady murmur of flight announcements. Naomi navigated through the crowd with measured calm, her ivory blazer crisp against the muted colors of weary travelers. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to commanding far greater spaces than this. And yet today, she was just another passenger. This wasn't a business meeting or a press event. Today she was here to experience Horizon Airways as any other traveler would, to see the culture of the airline she was on the verge of acquiring. Not from a boardroom, but from the inside. The first-class check-in counter loomed ahead, a pocket of polished counters and carefully curated smiles. Naomi handed over her passport and boarding pass without a word. The agent, a young woman with meticulously manicured nails painted a shimmering silver, glanced at the ticket. Her brow furrowed. "Just a moment," she said, her voice clipped as her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard. Naomi waited, her expression unreadable. This wasn't new. She had seen it before, the pause, the double check, the subtle hesitation, as if her presence in first class required verification. The agent picked up the phone, lowering her voice into a whisper. Naomi caught fragments of the conversation. "First class, yes, her ticket is confirmed." And then, as though flipping a switch, the agent hung up and turned back, now wearing a polished professional smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything seems to be in order. You can proceed to the priority security line." Naomi met her gaze and gave a small nod. "Thank you," she replied, her tone neutral but deliberate. She took her boarding pass and walked away, her posture straight, her steps even. Years ago, her father's words might have felt like a shield. Today, they felt like armor. The first-class cabin of Horizon Airways Flight 762 was a study in controlled luxury. Muted tones of gray and blue, brushed metal accents, soft lighting, everything designed to exude exclusivity. Naomi settled into her window seat, feeling the cool leather beneath her fingertips. She had barely adjusted her carry-on when she heard it, a muttering. "This is what they're letting in now?" The voice was low but pointed. She turned slightly, catching sight of the speaker. A man in his 60s, his silver hair combed back, his tailored navy suit and gold cufflinks reflecting the quiet arrogance of old money. "First class used to mean something," he added, his voice rising just enough for others to hear. Naomi met his gaze for only a brief moment, her expression unreadable. And then she turned away. "You can control how you respond." A woman a few rows back leaned toward her companion, her pearl necklace gleaming under the cabin lights. Naomi couldn't make out their words, but the faint laughter that followed, that she understood. A flight attendant appeared at Naomi's side, her practiced smile as polished as the silver tray she carried. "Would you care for a drink before takeoff, ma'am?" "Water, please." Naomi's voice was steady. "Of course." For the briefest moment, the attendant's eyes flickered toward the man across the aisle before she turned and disappeared into the galley. Naomi allowed herself a small, private sip of satisfaction before turning to the window. Outside, the runway stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering in the afternoon heat. The engines hummed as the plane began its slow taxi, and then the man across the aisle leaned forward. This time his voice was low but sharp. "You don't look like you belong here." Naomi turned to face him fully, her gaze calm but piercing, and then she spoke. Soft, even, deliberate. "That's funny," she said, tilting her head slightly, "because I was just thinking the same about you." For a moment, the man froze. His smug expression faltered. A faint flush crept up his neck. He muttered something under his breath and turned away, retreating into the safety of his seat. Naomi's lips curved into the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. You can control how you respond. The engines roared louder. The plane lifted off, the powerful ascent pressing her back into her seat. As the cabin steadied, the tension ebbed slightly, the murmurs fading, the hum of the flight attendants resuming their rounds. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the familiar rush of flight, her mind replaying the events of the day. The agent at check-in, the whispers, the subtle but deliberate reminders that some still questioned her place here. But none of it mattered, because they didn't know what she was really here for. They didn't know that Naomi Carter wasn't just a passenger on this flight. She was about to own the airline. The quiet doubts, the dismissive glances, the unspoken question of her place. They had followed Naomi Carter throughout her career, but they no longer stung the way they once had. She had learned to let them slide past her, like water against stone. Her father's voice came rushing back, clear as if he were sitting beside her. David Leung saved lives, Naomi. He earned his place 100 times over, but they still couldn't see past their own prejudice. Don't let them make you small. She thought of David, of the countless doors that had slammed shut in his face despite his brilliance. Her father had spent his life trying to pry those doors open. And now, that fight was hers. This flight wasn't about the silver-haired man across the aisle, or the whispers from strangers, or proving she belonged. It was about Horizon Airways, understanding its culture, identifying its flaws, and finding the cracks that would allow real change to take root. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Naomi closed her eyes. This was just the beginning. The cabin lights dimmed, casting a soft glow over the first-class section. The hum of the engines blended with hushed conversations, the occasional clinking of glasses filling the space. Naomi sat motionless, her gaze locked on the horizon outside the window. Below, the deep blue of the Atlantic stretched endlessly, vast and unyielding, a mirror to the quiet storm brewing inside her. For nearly 2 hours, the flight had been routine, until it wasn't. The first sign was subtle, a faint vibration beneath her feet, rhythmic, uneven. Naomi frowned, her instincts sharpening. She had spent enough time studying aircraft mechanics to recognize when something wasn't right. Her fingers curled around the armrest, her polished composure giving way to a flicker of unease. Then, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice was calm. Too calm. "We are experiencing minor technical difficulties with one of our engines. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will provide updates as necessary." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Some passengers turned toward the windows, trying to see what they couldn't understand. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Naomi remained still, but her mind was racing. Minor technical difficulties. She had heard those words before. Her father had told her stories of pilots using that phrase to prevent panic. But Naomi knew better. Minor issues didn't cause vibrations strong enough to rattle the water in her glass. Across the aisle, the silver-haired man who had mocked her earlier was no longer smug. His fingers fidgeted with his seatbelt buckle, his complexion visibly pale. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. Naomi's gaze shifted to the flight attendants. They moved briskly through the cabin, reassuring passengers with well-practiced smiles. But Naomi saw what others didn't. The tightness in their shoulders, the hurried whispers between them. They were worried too. Her eyes flickered back to the window. She focused on the faint tremor along the engine casing. This wasn't turbulence. The vibrations were too localized, too mechanical. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "The skies don't forgive carelessness, Naomi. You have to act before the problem acts for you." And then, as if on cue, the plane jolted violently. Several passengers were thrown forward against their seatbelts. Gasps filled the cabin. A child somewhere in the back began to cry. Naomi's pulse quickened, but her expression remained unreadable. Her storm was internal, a war of thoughts and calculations, running through every possibility, every outcome. The intercom crackled again. This time, the captain's voice wasn't just strained, it was fraying at the edges. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an issue with Engine 2. Please remain seated. Our crew is working to address the problem." The murmurs grew louder, concern tipping into panic. Naomi's mind moved faster than her heart could beat. An engine imbalance, overheating, a compressor stall? None of these possibilities were good. Across the aisle, the silver-haired man turned to her. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced with desperation. "Do you think we're in danger?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Naomi met his gaze. Her expression was impossible to read. "I think the crew is doing everything they can," she said evenly. She didn't add, "but I doubt their training has prepared them for what's coming next." Her thoughts shifted to the cockpit, to the pilots, scanning instruments, running checklists, making split-second decisions. She debated her options. Stepping in could save lives, but it would also reveal who she was. She wasn't ready for. Another jolt, more violent this time. The plane shuddered with such force that the cabin fell into complete silence. Naomi didn't hesitate. She unbuckled her seatbelt and rose to her feet. Immediately, a flight attendant approached. "Ma'am," she said, her professionalism strained with thinly veiled anxiety, "I need you to remain seated." Naomi turned to her. Her voice was calm but commanding. "I understand, but I need to speak with the captain. Now." The attendant hesitated. "Passengers aren't allowed in the cockpit." Naomi's tone hardened. "This isn't a request. Take me to the captain, or you'll waste precious time arguing with me." The attendant blinked. Something shifted in her expression. A silent realization that Naomi Carter was not just another passenger. After a tense pause, she nodded, and without another word, she led Naomi down the aisle. As Naomi walked, the whispers followed. The silver-haired man stared after her, his scorn replaced by confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as Naomi Carter disappeared into the cockpit. The flight attendant stood in front of Naomi Carter, her voice firm but laced with anxiety. "Ma'am, I need you to remain seated." Naomi met her gaze, calm but unwavering. "I understand," she said, her voice even. "But I need to speak with the captain. Now." The attendant hesitated, glancing around at the other passengers before lowering her voice. "Passengers aren't allowed in the cockpit." Naomi didn't blink. "This isn't a request." Her tone cut through the woman's objections like a blade. "I know what's happening, and I can help. Take me to the captain, or you'll waste valuable time arguing with me." The attendant blinked, caught off guard by Naomi's quiet authority. A long, tense pause. Then, she nodded, gesturing for Naomi to follow her. As Naomi made her way down the aisle, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The silver-haired man who had taunted her earlier stared after her, his disdain now replaced by something else. Confusion. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect. Whispers rippled through the rows of seats, passengers craning their necks to watch the woman who was breaking the rules they all clung to. The cockpit door opened. Naomi stepped inside, and everything changed. The air inside the cockpit was thick with tension. The pilots and first officers' voices overlapped, their words rapid and urgent as they worked through the issue. Naomi didn't wait for an invitation. "I know what's happening," she said, her voice steady as she closed the door behind her. "And I know how to fix it." The captain turned sharply, his face lined with stress and skepticism. "And who exactly are you?" he demanded. Naomi straightened her shoulders. "Naomi Carter," she said evenly, "Chief Executive Officer of Astra Air, and I helped design the emergency protocol you're about to use." For a moment, silence filled the cockpit. The captain's eyes widened, his hesitation momentary. Then, "All right," he said, nodding sharply. "Tell me what you know." Naomi stepped forward, her mind shifting into crisis mode as she scanned the instrument panel. The hum of the engines, the trembling of the controls, the flashing warnings on the screens. All of it told her one thing. The storm wasn't just outside the plane. It was here, and it wasn't waiting for anyone. The cockpit felt like a world apart from the passenger cabin, a universe of blinking lights and urgent voices. Naomi closed the door behind her, shutting out the whispers and uncertainty of the passengers. The pressure inside the cockpit was palpable, an unrelenting force pressing against the pilots as they scrambled to assess the situation. The captain turned to her, his expression a mixture of frustration and surprise. "Who let you in here?" he demanded. His tone was edged with irritation, but also something else, fear. Naomi's gaze remained steady. "Your flight attendant?" she replied simply, "and I'm here to help." The first officer frowned, glancing at her skeptically. "Ma'am, this is highly irregular. You need to return to your seat." Naomi took a step forward, her voice calm but commanding. "I understand protocol. But you don't have time for protocol right now. I know what's happening with your engine, and I can guide you through the emergency procedure. The captain hesitated, his eyes narrowing. And what exactly qualifies you to make that call? Naomi straightened her spine. Naomi Carter, CEO of Astra Air. I helped develop the emergency protocol you're about to use. For a moment the cockpit went silent. The captain's skepticism flickered, and then, recognition. Carter, he started. As in Samuel Carter? She nodded once. Yes, and I need you to trust me. Just as your predecessors trusted him. The captain's jaw tightened, his gaze darted to the instrument panel. A warning light blinked furiously, its red glow casting sharp shadows across their faces. Time was slipping away. With a sharp nod, he gestured for Naomi to proceed. All right, he said, his voice still tense but now tinged with a hint of respect. What do you suggest? Naomi stepped closer, scanning the controls with practiced precision. The cockpit smelled faintly of ozone and metal, the air thick with the weight of impending decisions. She recognized the problem immediately. An imbalance in Engine 2, likely caused by a misfire in the combustion chamber, a scenario her team had simulated countless times during protocol development. Shut down Engine 2 immediately, she instructed. The first officer hesitated, his hand hovering over the controls. If we shut it down now, we lose thrust. Naomi's eyes locked onto his. You're already losing thrust. And if the compressor stalls, you'll have an uncontrollable vibration that could destabilize the entire aircraft. Do it, now. The captain hesitated for only a second. Then, he reached for the controls and killed the engine. The sound of Engine 2 powering down was both a relief and a stark reminder of the stakes they faced. The plane shuddered briefly. Passengers would feel it. Panic would spread. But then, the aircraft steadied. The worst of the vibrations subsided as the imbalance was resolved. Naomi exhaled slowly. Now, she continued, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Redistribute the thrust between the remaining engines. The first officer worked quickly, his hands moving deftly across the controls. Naomi glanced at the altimeter. You need to descend to 30,000 feet. The captain adjusted the controls. Descending to 30,000, he confirmed. The plane jolted slightly as it began its descent. Naomi steadied herself against the edge of the console, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps. The immediate danger had been mitigated, but the situation was far from resolved. The captain turned to her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering disbelief. I have to ask, he said. Why are you here? Why not send someone else? Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile. Because this isn't just a flight for me. It's a test. For your airline, and for the people running it. The first officer frowned. A test, Naomi nodded. Astra Air is in the process of acquiring Horizon Airways. Before I commit to changing your company, I needed to see it firsthand, and now I have. The captain leaned back slightly, his hands still resting on the controls. Well, he said, his tone lighter but still laced with tension, I think you've seen us at our worst. Naomi's smile didn't waver. Perhaps. But crises reveal character, and I've seen enough to know there's potential here. The intercom buzzed. A flight attendant's voice came through, strained but professional. Captain, passengers are asking for updates. Should we address them? The captain hesitated, then turned to Naomi. Your call. She nodded. Patch me through. It'll strain the engines, Naomi Carter said, her voice steady as she analyzed the instruments. But it'll keep us stable until we reach a safer altitude. The first officer worked quickly, his hands moving deftly across the controls. Naomi's gaze flickered to the altimeter. You'll need to bring us down to 30,000 feet. At this altitude, the remaining engines can sustain the load. The captain nodded, adjusting the controls with precise movements. Descending to 30,000, he confirmed. The plane jolted slightly as it began its gradual descent. Naomi steadied herself against the console, her mind already racing ahead. The immediate danger had been mitigated, but the real crisis wasn't over yet. The captain turned to her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. I have to ask, he said, his voice quieter now. Why are you here? Why not send someone else? Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile. Because this isn't just a flight for me, she said simply. It's a test. The first officer frowned. A test? She nodded. Astra Air is in the process of acquiring Horizon Airways. Before I commit to changing this airline, I needed to see it firsthand. And now I have. The captain leaned back slightly, his hands still resting on the controls. Well, he said, his tone lighter but still edged with tension, I think you've seen us at our worst. Naomi's expression didn't waver. Perhaps. But crises reveal character. And I've seen enough to know there's potential here. The intercom buzzed, drawing their attention. Captain, came the voice of a flight attendant, strained but professional. Passengers are asking for updates. Should we address them? The captain hesitated, then glanced at Naomi. Your call, she nodded. Patch me through. The first officer flipped a switch. Naomi took a steadying breath and pressed the intercom button. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice calm and authoritative. This is Naomi Carter speaking. I want to assure you that the situation is under control. We are descending to a safer altitude, and our crew is managing the issue with professionalism and precision. Your safety is our top priority. She paused, letting the words settle. I also want to thank you for your patience. Moments like these remind us of the resilience we share, as individuals and as a community. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened, and we will provide further updates as needed. She ended the announcement and turned back to the captain. Maintain the descent. I'll return to the cabin and keep the passengers calm. As she exited the cockpit, the whispers in the cabin grew louder. All eyes turned to her, some filled with confusion, others with newfound respect. She could feel the shift. The same passengers who had questioned her presence just hours ago were now looking at her differently. Naomi walked back to her seat, her composure unshaken, her purpose clear. For the first time since the flight began, the cabin felt steady. The storm, at least for now, was behind them. The plane glided through calmer skies, its engines humming steadily as it neared the coast of Europe. The turbulence that had gripped the passengers hours earlier had given way to stillness. But the air in the cabin remained thick with unspoken questions. Naomi Carter sat in her seat, the faint vibration of the aircraft coursing through her as she stared at the now peaceful horizon. The intercom crackled, breaking the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into London Heathrow. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are stowed. We'll be landing shortly. Naomi exhaled slowly. The hardest part of the journey was over. But she knew. The real work had just begun. As the plane taxied to the gate, Naomi unbuckled her seatbelt and retrieved her carry-on from under the seat. Around her, passengers exchanged relieved glances, their earlier tension melting into quiet gratitude. Some cast lingering looks in her direction, whispers rippling through the rows as they pieced together fragments of what had unfolded. Then, a voice came from behind her, smooth, deliberate. Naomi Carter. She turned. Standing there, impeccable despite the turbulence, was Edward Montgomery. His sharp suit still crisp, his piercing blue eyes no longer cold, now tinged with curiosity. And perhaps something closer to respect. Mr. Montgomery, Naomi replied, her tone even. He gestured toward the empty seat across the aisle, his expression unreadable. May I? Naomi nodded, lowering herself back into her seat. Edward sat down, his movements precise, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The low hum of the engines filled the silence. Then, I suppose I owe you an apology, Edward said finally, his voice low but steady. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Oh, I didn't realize who you were. Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile. And who did you think I was? Edward hesitated. His gaze dropped briefly before meeting hers again. I assumed, he exhaled a quiet sigh. Well, I assumed wrong. Naomi's smile didn't falter. That much is clear. Edward Montgomery's words seemed to carry more weight than he had intended. You saved this flight, he said, his voice quieter now. Whatever my reservations about Horizon Airways' future under your leadership, I can't deny your capability. Naomi Carter raised an eyebrow. Capability, she repeated, amusement flickering in her tone. That's quite the compliment. Edward's expression softened. Just slightly. The faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. You're different from what I expected, he admitted. From what anyone expected, I imagine. Naomi leaned back slightly, studying him. This was the same man who had dismissed her earlier, who had embodied the very biases she had spent her career fighting against. And yet now, there was something different in his demeanor. A crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man behind the suit. "You knew my father," Naomi said suddenly, her voice quieter now. Edward's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting to the window. There was a pause. Then, "Yes," he admitted. "Samuel Carter, a great pilot, a better man. We served together briefly before he died." The unspoken weight of those words hung heavy in the air between them. Naomi's voice remained steady. "He spoke highly of you." Edward's eyes flicked back to her, something unreadable in his expression. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting at the edge of her mind. "But he never mentioned why you stopped flying." Edward exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening on the armrest. His tone was laced with something between regret and resignation. "It's a long story," he said finally. "Let's just say, the skies didn't always feel as open as they looked." Naomi nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Her father's letters had hinted at the systemic barriers that had kept even the most talented pilots grounded. And now, it was clear that Edward Montgomery hadn't been immune to them either. The plane came to a halt. The familiar chime signaled the beginning of disembarkation. Passengers rose, gathering their belongings, their movements filled with the quiet relief of a safe landing. Edward stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'll admit," he said, his voice carrying less of the cold certainty from earlier, "I wasn't sure about this merger." He paused, then glanced at her. "But after today, I'm beginning to think you might be the person to change things." Naomi rose as well, meeting his gaze directly. "This isn't just about changing Horizon Airways. It's about changing what it represents. My father believed in a sky without barriers. That's the legacy I intend to carry forward." Edward held her gaze for a long moment. Then, he nodded. "If anyone can do it, it's you." Naomi watched as he walked down the aisle, disappearing into the sea of passengers. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Her father's vision for the world wasn't here yet. But for the first time, it felt within reach. The headquarters of Horizon Airways felt colder than Naomi had anticipated. The steel beams, the towering glass windows, the minimalist furniture, everything about the building seemed to echo the rigidity of its corporate culture. She had been here twice before, during the merger negotiations, but stepping inside now, as the CEO of Astra Air, and the de facto leader of the combined company, it felt entirely different. Naomi paused at the entrance to the boardroom. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished glass doors. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her posture, and stepped inside. The room was filled with key stakeholders from Horizon Airways. They sat around the expansive conference table like players in a high-stakes game. At the near end of the table, Edward Montgomery. His posture was as composed as ever. But Naomi noticed the faint tension in his shoulders. Other faces, some familiar, others not, turned toward her as she entered. Some nodded in greeting, others barely concealed their skepticism. Naomi took her seat at the head of the table, and then she spoke. "Good morning." Her voice was steady, commanding. "I'll keep this brief. The merger between Astra Air and Horizon Airways isn't just about numbers or market share. It's about redefining what aviation can be." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Naomi didn't miss the flicker of disapproval in the eyes of one of the board members. A man in his late 50s, his gray suit looked as outdated as his thinking. She pressed on. For decades, this industry has prioritized tradition over innovation, exclusivity over inclusivity. That changes today. A few of the board members exchanged glances. She didn't flinch. This isn't just about cost-cutting or streamlining operations. It's about transforming this company into a model of modern aviation, one that values diversity, one that fosters innovation, and most importantly, one that values the people who make it possible. She tapped a button on the tablet in front of her. The room dimmed. A presentation illuminated the screen behind her. The first slide displayed a quote from her father. "The sky doesn't care who you are. It's the people on the ground who decide whether you get to fly." Naomi turned back to the room. Her voice softened just enough. "This was my father's vision. Samuel Carter believed in a world where talent, not prejudice, determines success. That's the foundation we'll build on." Silence, a tension thick enough to cut with a blade. Naomi watched the room, measuring their reactions. This wasn't just another business deal. It was a battle for the future of aviation itself. And she wasn't here to lose. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of changes. Naomi Carter had known the process would be difficult, but the resistance she encountered surpassed even her expectations. Her first major initiative, a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program, was met with thinly veiled hostility from Horizon Airways senior managers. In one heated meeting, a department head scoffed. "Respectfully, Miss Carter," he said, his tone anything but respectful, "this feels like a distraction. We've been running a successful operation for years. Why fix what isn't broken?" Naomi's response was immediate. Her voice was calm but unyielding. Because success isn't measured by stability, it's measured by progress. If you're not evolving, you're falling behind. And if you're falling behind, you're not successful. The room fell silent. She let the moment linger. Then her voice sharpened. "This program isn't optional. If you can't adapt, then Horizon Airways isn't the right place for you." Outside the boardroom, the transformation began to take root. Naomi's handpicked leadership team, aligned with her vision, rolled out initiatives designed to upend the entrenched norms of the company. Hiring practices were overhauled, focusing on recruiting talent from underrepresented communities. New mentorship programs paired seasoned employees with younger recruits, fostering connections that transcended generations. One of the most ambitious projects? The launch of the Samuel Carter Aviation Scholarship, designed to support aspiring pilots from marginalized backgrounds. The program's announcement was met with widespread praise, but not without controversy. Some industry insiders dismissed it as pandering. Naomi saw it as essential. In a meeting with her communications team, she addressed the criticism directly. "If giving opportunity to those who've been overlooked is controversial, then I welcome the controversy." Despite the progress, resistance lingered. Naomi found herself fielding anonymous complaints and whispers of discontent within Horizon Airways' ranks. Edward Montgomery, who had transitioned into a role as senior advisor, proved to be an unexpected ally. "Change always feels like a threat," he told her one evening during a late-night strategy session, "especially to those who've benefited from the old ways. But I've seen enough to know you're on the right path." Naomi studied him, noting the sincerity in his voice. "Coming from you, that means a lot." Edward chuckled softly. "Don't get used to it." "I still think you're too idealistic," Naomi smirked. "And I think you're too cynical. But I suppose that makes us a good team." 6 months into the transformation, the impact was undeniable. Employee engagement scores soared, reflecting a renewed sense of purpose. Horizon Airways' reputation, once marred by accusations of elitism, began to shift. Customers noticed the difference. Flight attendants were engaged, marketing campaigns celebrated diversity, and corporate culture prioritized humanity over profit. At the heart of it all, Naomi remained steady. Her focus, unwavering. She knew the work wasn't over. But every small victory felt like a step closer to the world her father had envisioned. Standing in her office late one evening, she gazed out at the city skyline. Her father's words echoed in her mind once more. "The sky doesn't care who you are. It's the people on the ground who decide whether you get to fly." Naomi smiled softly. The weight of his legacy no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a source of strength. The sky might not care, but she did, and she would make sure the people on the ground did too. The morning sun bathed the Samuel Carter Aviation Academy in golden light. Its modern glass facade gleamed, a beacon of hope. Naomi stood at the entrance, watching as the first group of scholarship recipients arrived. Their faces were a mix of nervous anticipation and quiet determination. Young men and women from backgrounds that, just a year ago, would have been overlooked by the industry. The inaugural class was small but symbolic, diverse in every sense of the word. A young woman in a hijab clutched her acceptance letter, her eyes scanning the building as though trying to memorize every detail. Beside her, a young man with a prosthetic leg adjusted his backpack, his expression resolute. Naomi felt a swell of pride. She murmured under her breath, fingers brushing the edge of the photo tucked in her pocket. "This is your legacy, Dad." The picture was one of the few she had of her father and David Liang, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of their aircraft, their expressions radiating quiet confidence. Inside the academy, the energy was electric. a space where potential wasn't measured by backgrounds or connections, but by skill and ambition. Naomi stepped forward. This wasn't just an academy. It was the future of aviation, a place where barriers would be shattered, and the sky would finally belong to everyone. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as Naomi Carter walked through the halls of the Samuel Carter Aviation Academy. Instructors stood at the front of classrooms outlining the day's orientation. This academy was more than a training ground for future pilots. It was a statement, a tangible rejection of the exclusivity that had once defined aviation. Naomi stopped outside one of the classrooms. Inside, a retired pilot, Margaret Evans, a 30-year industry veteran and one of Naomi's first hires for the academy, stood before the students. Her voice was strong, steady. "My career started when I was the only woman in my training program," Margaret said. "It wasn't easy. But I had mentors who believed in me. Now, I'm here to make sure you all get the support you deserve, no matter who you are or where you come from." The students nodded, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and inspiration. Naomi lingered a moment longer before moving on. She had work to do. Back at Horizon Airways headquarters, the mood was less celebratory. The transformation of the company had not come without its struggles. Many employees had embraced the changes, but a vocal minority remained resistant. Their complaints simmered beneath the surface, like a quiet storm brewing. Edward Montgomery was waiting for her in the conference room. A stack of papers spread out before him. Naomi took a seat across from him. Her voice was neutral. "I assume these are the latest complaints?" Edward nodded, his expression grim. "Anonymous, of course." He handed her a few sheets. Complaints about the scholarship program, the new hiring practices, the diversity training initiatives. Some people still think the old ways were just fine. Naomi scanned the lines of neatly typed grievances. The words were carefully chosen, but the sentiment was clear: resistance to change, fear of losing power, thinly veiled prejudice. She set the paper down and looked at Edward. "Do you believe they're right?" Edward leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "I think they're scared. Change isn't easy, especially for people who've benefited from the status quo. But fear doesn't justify standing still." Naomi nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't." She exhaled, frustration creeping into her tone. "But I won't pretend this isn't exhausting. Sometimes it feels like for every step forward, someone's trying to pull us 2 steps back." Edward's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Welcome to leadership. It's not about winning every battle. It's about making sure the right ones are won." Naomi said nothing for a moment, letting his words settle. Then she straightened. "We'll keep moving forward. The voices of resistance are loud, but they don't represent everyone. I've seen the impact of what we're doing at the academy in the field. That's what matters." Edward nodded. For the first time, he seemed to truly believe her. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Naomi juggled meetings with the academy staff, strategy sessions with her leadership team, public appearances that positioned Horizon Airways as a leader in modern aviation. The changes were beginning to bear fruit. Employee engagement surveys showed a marked improvement in morale. Customer feedback highlighted the visible shift in Horizon Airways' culture. The airline's newly diversified workforce sparked innovations that were already making headlines in the industry. But challenges remained. At a quarterly review meeting, a major investor voiced concerns. "These initiatives are costly," he said. "Are we sure this focus on inclusivity won't come at the expense of profitability?" Naomi met the challenge head-on. Her voice was firm, unwavering. Profitability and inclusivity are not mutually exclusive. In fact, embracing diversity strengthens our brand. It attracts new talent. It creates loyalty among customers who see themselves reflected in our values. The numbers already support this, and they will continue to do so. The investor leaned back, skeptical, but silent. Naomi could see the wheels turning in his mind. For now, that was enough. That evening, Naomi returned to her office. The city lights stretched out before her, a reminder of how far she and the company had come. She reached into her desk, pulling out a faded photograph. Her father and David Long standing shoulder to shoulder in front of their aircraft, their expressions radiating quiet confidence. She placed it beside her tablet, lost in thought. The anniversary of the merger was approaching. It had been 1 year since she had stepped onto that fateful flight, an anonymous passenger testing the limits of a company that didn't see her coming. So much had changed. But the journey was far from over. Naomi thought of the academy students, Margaret Evans, the employees who had embraced the new vision. Most of all, she thought of her father. His belief in a better world had set her on this path. She smiled softly. The horizon was vast, filled with challenges and possibilities. But she was ready for whatever lay ahead. The auditorium at the Samuel Carter Aviation Academy buzzed with anticipation. A celebration was about to begin, not just of the Academy's first graduating class, but of the movement they had started. A new era of aviation, one where the sky finally belonged to everyone. The soft hum of conversation blended with the faint notes of a piano playing in the background. Evening sunlight streamed through the expansive glass windows, casting golden beams that seemed to anoint the stage. At the center stood the emblem of the Samuel Carter Aviation Academy, flanked by banners representing the newly transformed Horizon Airways and its vision for the future. Naomi Carter stood just off stage, her hand resting lightly on the podium. She took a steadying breath, the weight of the moment settling over her like a familiar cloak. This was what she had worked for. The countless battles fought, the resistance weathered, the vision nurtured to life. But tonight was not just about her. It was about the dreams of others, made possible by the foundation her father and David Liang had laid. The crowd before her was a tapestry of faces. The Academy's first graduating class, their pride shining through their crisp uniforms. Horizon Airways employees, many of whom had embraced the changes Naomi had championed. Industry leaders, curious to witness the unfolding legacy. Among them sat Edward Montgomery. His usual guarded expression had softened, more reflective than she had ever seen him. The master of ceremonies announced her name, and the audience erupted into applause. Naomi stepped forward. The sound filled the room, echoing in her ears, a symphony of support she hadn't fully anticipated. She adjusted the microphone. Her voice was steady as she began. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we gather not just to celebrate the success of the Samuel Carter Aviation Academy, but to honor the values and vision that brought us here. This is more than a milestone, it's a movement. The applause rippled again. But Naomi lifted her hand gently, signaling for silence. Her gaze swept across the room, then settled on the graduates, seated front and center. 55 years ago, my father, Samuel Carter, stood on the deck of an airfield much like this one, with his best friend and fellow pilot, David Liang. They believed in a simple truth, that the sky doesn't care who you are, only that you have the courage and skill to take flight. Behind her, a screen lit up with a black and white photograph. Samuel and David, young, resolute, united against the odds. For decades, my father fought for an aviation industry that valued talent over prejudice. A sky where no one was held back by barriers they didn't build. Today, as I stand before you, I'm proud to say that dream is becoming reality. Naomi's voice softened as she addressed the graduates directly. To each of you, I want to say this. You've earned your wings. You've proven that talent, courage, and persistence can overcome even the tallest barriers. You are the new guardians of the skies, and I can't wait to see how far you'll soar. A standing ovation erupted. The applause reverberated through the room. Like a heartbeat, Naomi stepped back, allowing the graduates their moment in the spotlight. Their pride shone brighter than the lights on the stage. As the ceremony transitioned into a reception, Naomi made her way through the crowd. She exchanged handshakes, hugs, and quiet words of gratitude. Then, she paused. A young woman in a hijab stood with her family, posing for a photograph. The sight brought a smile to Naomi's face. She remembered the woman's nervousness on the first day of the academy and the quiet strength she had shown in the months that followed. The young woman turned, catching Naomi's eye. For a moment, their gazes held. Naomi gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. The graduate's smile widened, her gratitude unspoken but deeply understood. Later that evening, Naomi found herself in a quiet corner of the observation lounge. The room's expansive glass walls offered an unobstructed view of the airfield. Outside, planes glided across the tarmac, their silhouettes illuminated by the glow of runway lights. She heard soft footsteps behind her. Edward Montgomery. He handed her a glass of champagne. His expression was uncharacteristically warm. "You've done something remarkable here," he said simply. Naomi took the glass, her smile tinged with emotion. We've done something remarkable. None of this would have happened without the people who believed it was possible. Even the reluctant ones. Edward chuckled softly, his gaze drifting to the view outside. You know, when this started, I thought you were trying to rewrite the rules of an industry that didn't want to change. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. But now I think you've rewritten the rules of what leadership looks like. Naomi looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Coming from you, that might be the highest compliment I've ever received. He raised his glass slightly. Don't let it go to your head. They clinked glasses. A quiet moment of camaraderie, one that had been hard-won. Outside, a plane roared to life on the runway. Naomi turned her gaze to the sky. She had spent her life fighting to change the industry. And now, she was beginning to see it happen. Not just in policies, not just in numbers, but in people. People who had once doubted her, and now respected her. People who had once been excluded from the sky, and now had a place in it. For the first time in years, Naomi Carter felt at peace. The battle wasn't over, but she had taken a world that refused to change, and she had changed it anyway. Naomi Carter let out a quiet laugh as Edward Montgomery raised his glass slightly. Don't let it go to your head. They clinked glasses, the crisp chime marking a moment of hard-won camaraderie. As the night stretched on, Naomi lingered in the observation lounge. Her thoughts turned inward. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the worn photograph of her father and David Leon. She placed it gently on the table before her, tracing the edges with her fingers. Her mind filled with memories, her father's voice, his wisdom, his unwavering belief in her. Outside, a plane roared to life on the runway. Its engines thundered against the stillness of the night. Naomi watched as it ascended, higher and higher, until it disappeared into the horizon. Her father's words echoed in her mind once more. The sky doesn't care who you are. It's the people on the ground who decide whether you get to fly. She leaned back in her chair. A quiet sense of fulfillment settled over her. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, vast, open, filled with possibilities. Naomi smiled softly. She had honored her father's legacy, but more importantly, she had built one of her own. And though her work wasn't finished, she felt ready for whatever came next. Naomi remained in the observation lounge, the hum of the planes a quiet reminder of the journey she had taken. As the last plane of the evening ascended into the vast sky, she smiled. A soft, knowing smile. Her father's words echoed once more. The sky doesn't care who you are. It's the people on the ground who decide whether you get to fly. But Naomi's journey didn't end here. It was only the beginning. The transformation at Horizon Airways. The dreams realized at the Samuel Carter Aviation Academy. The courage she inspired in others. These became more than her personal triumphs. They grew into a movement of change, a testament to breaking barriers, a call to embrace limitless possibilities. Naomi Carter's story is a powerful reminder. Justice, progress, and change begin with a single bold step. If you were in her position, how would you inspire change? How would you lead the way to justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, like this video, share it to spread the message of resilience. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.